That engagement and that leadership and that public ownership was at the core of our success in terms of really moving this initiative, the Youngstown 2010 initiative, forward. When I started this, my involvement in this process started because I was the director of community development, and our community development agency was the agency that was funding this visioning and planning initiative. And literally, I remember standing on the stage in front of 1,300 people with my then boss, who was the mayor, and I said, and the council members sitting there, and I said, you know what? This is bigger than the mayor, who, again, was my boss at the time. This is bigger and more important than the council members. This has to be owned and driven by the community, because mayors come in with different political ideologies, council members come and go, and everybody wants to put their stamp on it. I said that we had to make this vision and this plan large enough and strong enough to withstand whoever happened to be sitting in that office, just in case they thought, well, I'm the mayor now, I'm gonna take the city in this direction. There had to be an expectation that the people would rise up and almost revolt and say, here are our expectations, here is our plan, and we expect you to carry it forward. And it was really that night that I became inspired. I had no designs and visions of running for mayor, but I really became inspired when I saw that level of feedback from the community standing up and saying, you know what, we're no longer going to sort of sit and wait for the edict to come down from City Hall.
I want to ask one more question to Andre before we turn it open to the audience. And you get all the tough questions because you're not elected by someone.
Right.
Someone's paying you to do this. It's a tough question, but it's an easy one at the same time. Are you optimistic about Detroit? And if so, why? And can you be specific? If not, why?
I'm very optimistic, quite honestly. First, it starts with the person that's in place right now, Mayor Bing. Yeah. And he has a vision. And I think he's brought in some very sharp people, besides myself.
I'm working for him too.
I don't work for him.
Sorry, I had to.
What does that mean?
To really help craft a realistic and, most importantly, an implementable vision for Detroit. Because if it can be done in Detroit, it can be done anywhere. And Detroit is not going to be the last city that, and currently is not the only city that's facing these issues. And quite honestly, this is not to sound, excuse the word hokey here, but it's the people. There's a very, and you know this, there's a very, you know this as well, very strong will. The spirit in Detroit is very strong. And they are committed. And they are not going anywhere. And I think there are really people who are invested in Detroit for the long haul. Not what is going to happen in 5 years, but what's going to happen in the next 25, the next generation. What is my Detroit that I've experienced for not only my generation, but generations before? What is it going to look like? And I think the other reason why I'm optimistic is because I think Detroit, despite it being down somewhat, I think with the leadership that's in place now and the connections that they're making, they're actually, for the first time in decades, really starting to think about themselves outside of the Detroit southeastern region. How are they positioned in the Midwest? How are they positioned in the Great Lakes? Internationally, where are they at? I think it's a great question because, when you look at what are the success stories out there, where has this been done before? Obviously, at least around the country, Pittsburgh comes to mind. Right. Meds, eds, right. Research. But I think for Detroit, they really need to start looking internationally. And in Europe, a number of countries in Europe have done this several times over the past 300 or 400 years. Post-industrial cities that have boomed and have declined and have came back. I think one that comes to mind, or several that come to mind for me, Sheffield, England, Belfast, Bilbao is an obvious one. One that's not talked much about, but there's a real connection with Detroit, is Turin in Italy. Mm-hmm. And they set out on a plan, as you all know, in 1993, where they had, 84 action items? And it was essentially a 20-year plan. And come maybe 2004, 2003, they actually were well ahead of implementing their plan. And they were able to get the government to buy in to the vision, and they have actually turned it around. They've turned that city around. And now they actually have international presence, at least economically, with developing relationships with other cities.
And this is where it's hard. Kind of goes to the other question. Our cities have to get younger and smarter if we're going to succeed, bottom line. We can't be, especially older industrial cities of the Northeast and Midwest, the places that our young people leave to go somewhere else. Now, how do we keep them? One of the ways is to create places that are interesting to them. And this is in Flint, and this is the one thing that I think is working. We made, meaning my land bank that I started and a group of private developers, made a decision to invest, substantially invest, in creating this really interesting, vibrant, entertainment-focused downtown, which, believe it or not, is actually working. And we're now seeing young people who used to leave stay. Now, I don't know what the numbers are, but the one thing we know for sure, that some 20-something is out there with the next billion-dollar idea. And I just soon have them plant that billion-dollar idea in Flint instead of in Phoenix. And if we can, every time we save one of those kids from leaving, and that young, thoughtful, creative, entrepreneurial mind takes root in one of these cities, we have a chance to build an economy. That takes long-term investment.
But there is nothing that I've done in my career that compares to what's being discussed here today in terms of excitement, challenge, and meaning. We all live in these cities. Chicago was this far in the 1970s from being the next Detroit. This far. New York didn't become the next Detroit because 4 or 5 people of great will got together and kept it from being that. It was closer than Chicago and a lot denser. So the trauma would have been right here. All of us are required to pay attention to this problem because it will come to our cities. I'm from Phoenix. And I wrote a story in 1988 called Building Slums in the Sand. It was all about the newest subdivisions on the perimeter of that city, which are now vacant. So it can happen elsewhere, and we all have to take this to heart. This has been a great set of conversations, and it's just the tip of an iceberg here. It isn't actually dull to learn about tax policy and land banking.
I don't think it is.
It turns out it's actually pretty fascinating because you learn how your city works.
Right.
You learn what really makes the cogs go around. So I want to encourage all of you to get engaged in this, start reading about it, and start thinking about it in terms of your own town.